Now, the philosopher turned songwriter, John Denver, famously sang that country roads take me home to the... There we go. There, we'll stop there. Edward and the Magnetic Zeros said, home is wherever I'm with you. Cute. And Good Neighbours in their song Home say it's the place I go when I start slipping. But what is home? In my search for answers, I went to the place we all now go, ChatGPT. And I asked it, what is home, ChatGPT? And here's what it said. In short, home is not just the place you go to, it's the place you return to, physically, emotionally, or spiritually, when you want to feel whole. So there we go, ChatGPT sorted the sermon. Well, for me, I get a glimpse of this home on a Friday night. I drive home from work, and I usually pick up an energy drink on my way. Don't judge me. And when I get home, in our house, as you open the front door, you can see right through to the kitchen. And usually, when I'm looking through to the kitchen, I can see my wife, Tanya, often preparing some of the food that we're about to eat. And as she looks up and I look across, we share this moment, this glance. And in that time, I know I've come home. We might get excited and run to each other and embrace and a warm hug in a good day. But soon my mind has turned to the caffeine-fueled impending bowel movement, and I run upstairs. I get a shower. I get some new clothes on, some comfies, and I realize I've really hit my 30s. Now, I didn't grow up in the Church of England, but I love starting a tradition. And our tradition in our house is Friday night is curry night. For those of you who know my wife Tanya, she is an excellent cook. She will have been marinating the chicken for a famous butter chicken the night before. It's full of flavor, but mild on spice, just the way I want it. And we share this moment of cooking together. I contribute with the rice that you can see in the pan there. And we just share this time of being at home together. Now, another tradition I've started is Friday night film club, where we go to Netflix and we go for the #1 trending film on Netflix, which for the past month has been the legendary K-pop Demon Hunters. If you know, you know. And we're calm, we're relaxed, we're where we want to be, and we're sharing this moment together. Now, that's a moment of home for me, but I wonder what that looks like for you. Well, today what we're going to be looking at is a story of Jesus, and it's most commonly known as the Prodigal Son. It's found in Luke chapter 15 in the Bible. Now, for context, before we go into reading it, Jesus had been doing his thing for quite a while now. He'd been healing the sick, talking about God's kingdom, and teaching the crowds that gathered around him. And it's in one of these teaching moments we find our story. So just for context, at the start of Luke chapter 15, in verses 1 and 2, it says this. Now the tax collectors and sinners, basically the bad people at the time, were all gathering around Jesus to hear Jesus. But the Pharisees and the teachers of the law muttered, "This man welcomes sinners and eats with them." Now, off the back of this, Jesus goes on to tell 3 stories: the lost sheep, the lost coin, and the lost or the prodigal son. Now, our story starts with a father, an older son, and a younger son. And the younger son rudely demands his inheritance. He then swiftly leaves home with it and wastes everything on wild living. Excessive partying, reckless spending, drunkenness. And eventually he runs out and becomes so desperate that he takes the lowest job that he can find. And he starts to envy the food that he's giving to pigs. Realizing his mistake, he thinks about home and decides to return to his father, confess his sin, and ask to be treated not as a son, but as a servant, because this would have been better than where he was. So we're going to pick up the story in our Bibles in Luke chapter 15. If you've got it, let's turn to it. It is going to come up on the screen. So Luke 15, starting from verse 20. So he got up and went to his father. But while he was still a long way off, his father saw him and was filled with compassion for him. He ran to his son, threw his arms around him and kissed him. The son said to him, "Father, I have sinned against heaven and against you. I'm no longer worthy to be called your son." But the father said to his servants, 'Quick, bring me the best robe and put it on him. Put a ring on his finger and sandals on his feet. Bring the fattened calf and kill it. Let's feast and celebrate. For this son of mine was dead and is alive again. He was lost and is found.' So they began to celebrate. Meanwhile, the older son was in the field. When he came near the house, he heard music and dancing. So he called one of his servants and asked, 'What is going on?' 'Your brother has come home,' he replied, 'and your father has killed the fattened calf because he has him back safe and sound.' The older brother became angry and refused to go in. So his father went out and pleaded with him. But he answered his father, 'Look, all these years I've been slaving away for you and never disobeyed your orders. Yet you never gave me even a young goat so I could celebrate with my friends. But when this son of yours, who has squandered your property with prostitutes, comes home, you kill the fattened calf for him.' 'My son,' the father said, 'you are always with me, and everything I have is yours. But we had to celebrate and be glad, because this son of yours was dead and is alive again. He was lost and is found.'" So as we dwell in this story for a few moments, I want us to think about three things. How can we come home? How can we be at home well? And how is the Father bringing home to us? So what does it look like to come home? Well, as I said, this story of Jesus is most commonly known as the Prodigal Son. Now, we use the word prodigal, and most people understand what they think that means. But if you look at the word, it's not actually what you might think. I often thought it was just someone who comes home, someone who returns back after doing something wrong. Well, actually, the word prodigal comes from the Latin proditus, and it means to spend money or resources freely and recklessly. In other words, to be wastefully extravagant. Now, at this point, avoid the temptation to look at someone next to you and say, "That's you." But in the first part of the story, we see a younger son rudely demanding his inheritance, essentially wishing his father to be dead and going off recklessly spending his father's money. This son ends up bankrupt, hungry, and disrespected. And my question to us at this moment is, doesn't he deserve this? I know that we know what's coming, but surely this is how the story should end. The rude, disruptive, ignorant person should reap the rewards of his actions. Fair is fair. And I'm sure at this point, when Jesus is saying these words, the Jewish leaders are nodding to each other, maybe looking judgmentally at the sinners and the tax collectors. "Malden, that's you." But the story doesn't end here, and Jesus begins to break the mold of religious thinking. He even breaks our expectations, maybe even today. And in the pits of his despair, the younger son thinks about home. His mind is turned back to the father. He's still covered in dirt, still stinking of pigs, still reeling in his poor choices, but the thought of home and the father enters this space. Ecclesiastes chapter 3, verse 11 says this: "God has set eternity in the human heart." And I wonder if the younger son, in the midst of his despair and pain, felt a pang in his heart for his eternal home. And I wonder in our brokenness whether we feel that same itch. Surely there's somewhere better for me. Just like the son, we're faced with a choice. And I think sometimes we assume, well, I've got to sort myself out first before I can go back home. I remember as a teenager growing up, when my parents would have people around for dinner, the hour or 2 hours before were chaos. Everyone would have a sponge in hand, be scrubbing, it would be all hands on deck, trying to make the house immaculate. But now, as an adult myself with my own house, I find myself doing the exact same thing. Why do we do this? Now, one reason may be because I'm scared of my wife and what she'll do if I didn't help. But I think really it's that we want to prove ourselves to be clean and worthy and righteous to receive the guests. We want to put our best foot forward. But Jesus is saying this should not be our attitude to God. I'm a terrible procrastinator. I fill my life with video after video, football transfer news, which for Everton is starting to get interesting, and general lazy, distracted behavior. And after these prolonged periods and cycles, I start to feel numb. I start to feel a bit apathetic. I start to feel distant from God. Sometimes weeks go by where I've hardly prayed, barely touched my Bible, and turning up to church then becomes a real battle. It's easy to think, well, who am I going to church, pretending I'm living this Christian life well? I've not been as loving or as disciplined or as prayerful as I should be. And in my mind, I've created that distance based on what I've done. And maybe you're here today, thinking, well, if you knew me, my life's not worthy. Maybe the things I do outside of here aren't worthy. You wouldn't bother with me. God wouldn't bother with me. You may have disqualified yourself based on your performance, your choices, your habits. But Jesus in this story is saying to us that this is not the gospel. That's not good news for anyone. It's here in the mess, in the wrong choices, the brokenness, the shame, and the guilt that he came. In fact, as we'll see, he runs into it. John chapter 1, verse 14 says this: "The Word became flesh and made his dwelling among us." Now, the Word he's talking about here is Jesus. It's the story we celebrate at Christmas time of Jesus coming into our mess. God isn't afraid of our drifting, of our procrastination, of our mess. But we must acknowledge it, and we must turn back our focus to him. So in the story, the son started his journey home to reconnect with his family, not as a son, but as a servant. And I was reminded of a song that we sometimes sing in church called "Run to the Father." I'll spare you my singing voice because nobody needs that. But the lyrics go as follows: "I run to the Father, I fall into grace. I'm done with the hiding, no reason to wait." And that phrase, "fall into grace," struck me at this point of the story. We're so used to the expression to fall from grace, aren't we? More and more, it seems, in the public realm, we're seeing celebrities, influencers, leaders being exposed for their wrong actions and often punished for them. And this is what the younger son had done in our story. He'd fallen from grace. He'd disrespected his family. He'd ruined his life. If it was the 21st century, he would have been cancelled. But as we see, when they're reunited, he could never fall low enough to miss the grace of the Father. Falling into grace is the opposite of earning your reward. It's a state of surrender and acknowledging, I cannot do this off my own back. Now, this picture is of a famous painting by Rembrandt. And it depicts this homecoming scene, this encounter of the younger son falling into his father's embrace. And I just love that imagery, that idea of the son coming back with a script of everything he'd done wrong, the father essentially ignoring it and hugging him, kissing him, telling his servant to fetch sandals and a ring and throw a feast for him. Now remember that word prodigal, to spend resources freely. In this moment, in this image, who is the one extravagantly spending their resources? Isn't it the Father who is pouring out his abundance of gifts on his undeserving Son? This image captures our God's heart towards us. Henri Nouwen reflected on this story and this famous depiction and said this: "I am the prodigal son. Every time I search for unconditional love where it cannot be found." Isn't that all too familiar? When we look for love from our social media likes, we search for acceptance from our friends and colleagues. When we indulge and hide ourselves in the things that we know are bad for us, we are being like the younger son. And in this quote, Nouwen outlines the universal human temptation to seek love, belonging, and identity in people or achievements rather than in God. And the irony is this: the younger son had all of that at the start of the story. He was accepted and loved and cherished. For some of us today, it's not about a miraculous turnaround from promiscuity, prostitutes, and pigs. But there are things we regularly run off to seek love from where it cannot be found. I doubt the younger son then became a perfect person overnight, and neither do we. Like many younger siblings, myself included, he probably still pushed the boundaries, probably still messed up, and had to be forgiven again. We're all human, and therefore we stumble as we aim to get it right, but God's grace meets us halfway. He doesn't lower his standards, but will always welcome us home, every time, with open arms. Even St. Paul alluded to his own cycle of straying from the right path and trying to come back. In Romans 7:18-19, he writes this: "For I have the desire to do what is good, but I cannot carry it out. For I do not do the good I want to do, but the evil I do not want to do, this I keep on doing." He goes on to say in verse 24, "What a wretched man I am." Maybe you're feeling wretched today. We can see Paul's prodigal moment here. In this despair of feeling like he's continuing to mess up, continuing to do the wrong things, to stray from his heavenly calling, Paul knows the answer is coming back home. So how do we create a habit of coming home? It may be on a daily basis, just like when we go out in the day and come back home at night. Our spiritual lives should have that same rhythm. Many Christian and non-Christian leaders talk about the importance of the morning, and I know not everyone's a morning person. But Charles Spurgeon says this: "The morning is the gate of the day and should be well guarded with prayer." So even before the day has started, can we align with the Father's heart? Can we be at home and therefore be more likely to come back each and every day? Now, you might want to pair this with a weekly rhythm of homecoming. Some of you might see coming to church with your brothers and sisters here as part of reconnecting, of coming back home to worship him. Or you could connect with a group and share life with each other as you seek God together. Whatever it is, don't rely on coming home once and for all. Set your mind on regular homecomings, daily, weekly, and monthly. So how do we be well at home? We're going to look at the older brother now, and I'm going to ask you to pretend you're the bad guy in the story. Put yourself in his shoes. He had been at home this entire time, working hard for the family, and probably, ironically, helping to fatten the calf that was eventually barbecued. He was doing everything right, wasn't he? But clearly bitterness was growing within this son over the years. So when his long-lost brother comes home and there's a party atmosphere, his pain bubbles up to the surface through his reaction. And when the older son feels this pain and this sorrow, he doesn't repent and run back to the father. He chooses to wallow in his own frustration. In 2 Corinthians 7:10, Paul wrote about the importance of our response to pain, sorrow, and frustration. It says this: "Godly sorrow brings repentance that leads to salvation and leaves no regret. But worldly sorrow brings death." The older brother allowed his frustration to spiral him down a path towards his own demise and, more importantly, separation from the father. And both sons in this story experienced pain, but they reacted in totally different ways. It's a common misconception that once we've experienced God, our lives are instantly free from pain, sadness, and brokenness. But whilst pain is inevitable on this side of eternity, it's who we turn to in our pain that matters. Do we draw closer to God, or do we keep our distance? Now remember, this story was told to the religious leaders at the time so they could hear it and reflect on it. These leaders who on the surface had it all together, they were doing the right things, saying the right things, they seemed to be the closest to God. And I wonder if some of us who have been coming to church for a while get trapped in this mentality. We may find ourselves thinking, well, I serve on team. I regularly give to the life of this church. I'm here every single Sunday. And whilst all these things are good, it's so easy to think that we need to prove ourselves by our actions. Yes, I've been welcomed home, but let me justify my place in this home. And in this story, Jesus flips our focus away from ourselves and our works and our efforts and turns it towards the grace of the Father. It's all about him. Now, this is something I've been challenged with even in preparing this message, is this constant battle with this older brother mentality. And even though if my job as a teacher is to stand up in front of teenagers every day and make oxbow lakes and coastal erosion sound interesting, the idea of standing up here and talking to you guys is more scary. And when I dig down into my feelings, what worries me wasn't the content, but the idea that I might be found unworthy. Could I say the right things, bring the right phrases? Could I prove to you that I'm worthy of being listened to? I'll let you be the judge. But notice how all of these worries are focused on me, on my performance. And we often do this. We make life about ourselves. The whole point of this story is Jesus making it clear to us it's not about what you do. It's whose you belong to and where you go home to. The younger brother had shifted his attention back to the father, but the older one couldn't get over himself. We'll all go through pain, that's a guarantee, but it's how we use that pain to repent and turn our eyes away from ourselves and back to God. Now, as I said, I'm a teacher, so I get to experience the highs and a lot of the lows of teenage life. And one of the things that's been bubbling up at the moment is this idea of main character syndrome. It's where someone believes the worlds are revolving around them, and everyone else is just kind of a side character. And if we're honest, we kind of wrestle with this self-centered mentality. But the Christian faith really isn't about us. We're not the main characters, we're the side characters. Yes, we are loved and cherished by God, and there's a space in his home for us always. But it's all about who God is. In fact, the stories that Jesus told in Luke 15 aren't primarily about the object that was lost, but about the one who seeks them and restores them. If we think about the lost sheep, it was the determined shepherd who left the 99 to find the lost sheep. It was the diligent woman who found her lost coin, and it was the forgiving father who brought his son home. Now, I think the tax collectors and the sinners understood this grace. They knew they were lost and broken. But maybe it was the religious people who missed it. Faith calls us to shift our gaze from ourselves to the one who is beautiful, forgiving, and full of grace. It's not about grinding away for God's love, but receiving it as his beloved children. And God calls us to be sons, not slaves. Remember, both brothers talked about being a servant or being a slave. If we look from verse 29 at how the older brother responds when his father comes out to invite him back in, he says this: "Look, all these years I've been slaving away for you, and I never disobeyed your orders. Yet you never gave me even a young goat so I could celebrate with my friends." To which the father responds, and I imagine this in a calm and gentle voice: "My son," the father said, "you are always with me, and everything I have is yours. But we had to celebrate and be glad, because this brother of yours was dead and is alive again. He was lost and is found." And the story ends here. It doesn't afford us the luxury of knowing the older brother's reaction. It's like a cliffhanger that almost forms a challenge to us today. We can choose to repent and turn back to the Father and join in the family party. Or we can grovel and indulge in our pity party for one. The Father calls you back in as a son and as a daughter, but how will you respond? In Romans 8, verse 15, it says this: "The Spirit you received does not make you slaves, so you will live in fear again. Rather, the Spirit you received brought about your adoption to sonship. By him we cry, 'Abba, Father.'" Now that word Abba is an Aramaic word, and it describes the most intimate name for a fatherly figure. It's like a child saying daddy or mummy. We're not meant to see God as this distant slave driver we want to impress. We're called to know him deeply and be loved. In Romans 8, Paul goes on to say in verses 19 and 21, "For the creation waits in eager expectation for the children of God to be revealed. that the creation itself will be liberated from its bondage to decay and brought into the freedom and the glory of the children of God. We're not called children of God just for our own good. Yes, we should celebrate coming home, and everyone who does. But Paul is saying that the whole of creation is waiting and groaning to be brought back into the rightful order of the Father's house. So remember that question, what is home? Well, godly home is not a castle we always retreat to, but it becomes a kingdom we look to extend. So being a child then moves from being cuddled on your return to taking up your place in the family business. So how is God bringing home to us? Well, we're called to mature and to take up our responsibility to work with him, not for him. So what is the Father doing? Well, God is still in the business today of bringing people home. So our job is to make room for that. Recent research from the Bible Society has talked about a quiet revival that is going on right now in the UK. It found that 2 million more people are regularly attending church than 6 years ago. For context, that's about 4 Liverpools of people now attending church. It goes deeper into the demographics and found that Gen Z, those aged 18 to 24, in that demographic, church attendance has quadrupled. Now, in July, we were away as a church family at Focus. It's where we camp together, we meet with other churches in our network, and we see what God is doing. And this year, there was story after story of people coming to faith in ways and numbers that haven't been seen for some time. So much so, the overarching message to churches was to expand our capacity to welcome more people home. God right now is running out and bringing his children home under our noses. So how do we respond? Well, here at Penny Lane, God has been growing his church. We've seen significant growth in the numbers of people calling this church their home. The number of services has increased to create room for this growth. And we recently sent out our first church plant down the road in the hope of doing the same in a different area. We are seeing people here and now be welcomed back into the arms of the Father. But we believe he's not finished yet. Alex, who's the leader of this church, outlined the idea of Penny Lane personally welcoming 5,000 people back home. That's 1% of the 500,000 population of Liverpool. Now, our initial reaction to that, the pragmatists in the room, might be a bit skeptical and cynical. But I want us to feel and embrace the generous passion of the Father waiting by the door to run out to his lost children. We need to create space. We need to increase our capacity. And as an individual, that could look like creating space in your daily life for God, creating space in your conversations, being intentionally welcoming in church, or even meeting your friends, your colleagues, your flatmates halfway down the road and showing them the way home. And if God is going to bring more people, then we need more small groups for people to feel connected. We need larger teams to serve people well. And we may even need groups of planters who are willing to leave here and go to another part of the city to welcome people home there. As a church, we need to imitate the Father's heart with our culture. We should look to welcome well, to give generously, and to forgive freely, so that the work he has started will continue to grow, both for our own good, but for the good of the people outside these 4 walls.